Media Day. It's the day where we get to see the players, coaches, and front office back on the stage talking to the press and giving us glimpses and hope for what's to come this season. But more importantly, it means NBA basketball is almost back. Bulls are off to Nashville to begin training camp before their first preseason game, which is actually on Sunday when they take on the new-look Bucks with Damian Lillard. And I, for one, cannot wait for the new season to begin. Despite all the frustrations with the team from this past year, the seemingly uninspiring approach of the front office, but for me, it's still basketball, and it's finally back for another season. But anyway, in today's video, we're going to be recapping some of the key moments, takeaways, and themes from Media Day. You can also watch the press conferences from all the players, Billy Donovan and Arturas Karnisovas on the Chicago Bulls YouTube channel if you missed it, but I'll do my best here to condense and consolidate it and give my thoughts on what was discussed. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, of course, on Media Day, I'm always curious to hear what the players have to say, their thoughts and expectations for this upcoming season, and what they've been up to over the offseason. But mostly who I'm wanting to hear from is the front office, because one, we rarely get to hear from them, and two, they're the most accountable for this team and the expectations for the season. Yes, the players and the coaching staff need to be held accountable as well, but they're the ones that ultimately put this roster together, including hand selecting the head coach. Now, as a whole, I will say a lot of things said from AK and Billy Donovan at Media Day were pretty basic stuff, very similar comments they've made in the past and at the end of the season as it relates to their need to play faster, change their shooting profile, putting up more threes, all the stuff that we've heard before. I think the thing that drives fans a little crazy is that's all good and well when you say it and actually acknowledge what the problems are, but how are you actually going to fix it? How are you going to put that into practice on the court? One thing AK did say, though, and he emphasized this recently, is improving the team's cohesion. In my view, that's just another way of saying continuity, because we know they don't dare say that now with it being a trigger word amongst fans, but cohesion and creating a sense of team unity, relationship building, and an identity, which, to be fair, needs to be addressed because you could tell there was an obvious disconnect on the court a lot last season. And that disconnect led to complacency in games, it led to frustration from players, and it led to players not really giving their effort on the court at times. Now, this is part of the reason why they're having training camp in a new location in Nashville to try and build that cohesion in a company-level offsite, if you will, but we'll see if that actually produces any positive results. Now, of course, the question surrounding the Bulls going into the luxury tax was addressed, and AK did say, we're going into the luxury tax if we're confirming this is the right group of guys. Once you have consistent success, we can go for it, which honestly, this doesn't surprise me that AK gave this answer. I mean, I think we all know at the end of the day, ownership is never going into the tax and has no intention on doing so, but this is a way to deflect and say they will pay it if they feel they have the right team. But something tells me that even if the Bulls somehow knock things out of the park and say they're a top 3 team in the East around the trade deadline, they're not going to go all in and go into luxury tax and try to compete for a championship. I mean, the track record just is not there when these guys have only paid the luxury tax once in their near 40-year tenure owning the team. It's not going to happen unless they get back to a dynasty level like they were in the 90s. So I know some people were getting excited about this in the comments on the live stream, but it's all just noise in my view, even if the Bulls do come out and start dominating, which that in and of itself is going to be a remote possibility. One thing that Billy Donovan harped on a lot was talking about the Bulls finishing 24th on offense last year and how, in his view, that was greatly impacted by the Bulls' inability to get to the foul line and their inability to grab offensive rebounds for second chance points, which, all right, fair. The Bulls were 26th in the league last season in terms of free throw attempts. They were 28th in the league in offensive rebounds. And of course, he mentioned the lack of three-point shooting, which we all know the Bulls were last in the league. But he said getting to the paint will be the primary focus to potentially help all three of these issues, which from my perspective, I think is fair to say. I mean, getting the paint is important, especially when it comes to utilizing Vucevic more inside. Obviously, he's much more effective than he's just shooting the ball from the perimeter. We talked about this all season long, and even Vuce himself emphasized he wants and desires to play more inside in his press conference here on Media Day. But while getting to the paint should be a focus, it's got to be more than just that. There has to be more of an emphasis on ball movement, spacing the floor, getting more open looks on the perimeter, and finding cutters to the basket. No more stagnant offenses, even if that means ISO plays of just getting to the rim. Now, Billy also was asked about the starting lineup, more specifically who is going to be starting at power forward and point guard, and of course, he couldn't commit to what that's going to look like, and they don't know quite yet how the starting lineup is going to shake out, but they're going to use the players most effectively in terms of where they fit on the roster and getting the best out of the group. Talking about Patrick Williams specifically, how he may or may not start, but regardless, he's going to play an integral role where he's going to be getting a lot of minutes, whether it's starting or coming off the bench. The question that I was most curious about, and I myself have been asking this for a while, is how will the Bulls define success this season? And I really mean, how is AK going to define success? Because I know DeMar mentioned holding up a trophy in his press conference, which obviously the players are going to have much more lofty and aggressive goals. But for AK, his response was kind of simple, and that's to reach the playoffs. He then added, once you reach the playoffs, there's an opportunity for a lot of teams to make noise, which I guess I like that he's being realistic and not saying something like they expect to make it to the finals. But if the goal, or how you define success, is just simply to make the playoffs, after 3 years with this crew, clinging onto the hope that they're suddenly going to turn things around, opting to keep running things back versus tearing it down and starting fresh, I don't know, it just seems a bit underwhelming to me. And maybe the goal is to make the playoffs and actually be one of those teams that makes noise, but you would hope that after this front office has decided to keep this crew, a group that was underwhelming last year, you would kind of hope that a definition of success is more than just simply making the playoffs. Because if they make the playoffs and get bounced badly in the first round, but they still consider that a success and that becomes good enough in their eyes to keep running things back, Lord have mercy on all of us Bulls fans who will be raging come season's end. Now, of course, the media talked to a handful of players as well. Zach Lavine talked about how he was honing in on some skills and adding elements to his game. He focused a lot on shooting threes and finishing at the rim. He emphasized he believes in the crew. Otherwise, what are you even doing here if you don't believe in the actual roster that you have? DeMar, I love DeMar, man. He's just so chill, so honest, and no nonsense when it comes to talking to the media. You know, all of these guys, meaning all the players, were asked about what their thoughts were on the Bucks and the Celtics making these big moves in the Eastern Conference, and DeMar's response was very adamant that he loves it. He wants the competition. He wants to have that motivation to go up against some of the best talent in the league, or go against these super teams, if you will. That's what drives him and motivates him, and that it should drive the rest of the guys on the roster as well. Also, we may have found a new slogan for this season when DeMar was asked why he believes running it back for the third time with the big three of himself, Zach, and Vucevic. He responded, because the third time's a charm. I guess that's how we'll be approaching this season. Third time's a charm with everything. DeMar did also briefly talk about his contract extension discussions and how he really leaves that to his agent. Let him focus on what he can do best in terms of taking care of his family and getting better at playing basketball. He said that's not in his mind, and he's just ready to come and compete this season, which I'm sure some of that is true. DeMar strikes me as the type of guy who really would just focus on his game and not about an upcoming contract. But come on now, these guys are human. I'm sure that is still in the back of their minds, and for DeMar, he's no exception to that. The media also talked to Vucevic, and as I mentioned, there was talk about his role and what he envisions it to be for this upcoming season. He mentioned how he's working with the coaching staff to find better ways to utilize him, not even just from a shooting and scoring standpoint, but also having him be more of a playmaker, kind of using him more in a Nikola Jokic type role, which, not saying he's going to be on Jokic's level, but for Vucevic, he's a very skilled passing big man, but can also spread the floor with his ability to shoot, and also spread the floor with his ability to shoot, and has great footwork in the paint and finishing on the rim. I believe it was Sam Smith who asked Vucevic if they can play a style of offense similar to that of the Nuggets, and it kind of got me thinking that obviously, I mean, they're not going to be able to execute it like the Nuggets do because they have a much more skilled center and point guard, but similar styles of offense from a team that has talent but doesn't necessarily take that many threes. Again, the question is whether the Bulls can actually put that into practice and execute upon it. You know, one thing Vooch said that I think is important, and I mentioned this a couple months back, knowing that Lonzo Ball won't be playing this year, knowing they're going to have to build an identity without him, could help with the Bulls creating more stability and establishing an identity sooner. Last season, it was always, well, when Lonzo comes back, he's probably going to be coming back soon. And it never happened. This year, they know going into training camp, that's not going to happen. And Vucevic mentioned this is a way to establish who they are early on, which I agree with. Speaking of Lonzo, though, in a surprise, he was there at Media Day in uniform and all. Was not expecting that. And for Lonzo, it was really answering questions about how he was feeling, how his rehab was going, does he expect to play next season, and pretty standard responses, as he feels great about halfway through his current rehab process and that he fully expects to play next season. What I will say, though, is the positive attitude that Lonzo Ball has in all of this has been really admirable, because you're talking about a player who has played and been around basketball his entire life. It is his life. And to have that be stripped away from him at such an early stage in his career has got to be so frustrating. And for him to keep his head up and continue to work and getting back really says a lot about his character. Now, the media did also talk to Jevon Carter and Coby White, and there was one quote from Jevon Carter that I absolutely loved. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw me mention this, but when Jevon was asked about his thoughts on what the Bucks and Celtics have done this offseason, because they literally asked every player that on Media Day, his response, "I don't really care. I'm a Chicago Bull. I don't care what the Bucks and Celtics are doing." And that's the kind of response I want to hear from a new addition to this team. You know, I've said this before, but there is something different about bringing in a player that is from Chicago. Playing for the Bulls means something more to them. Putting on that jersey after dreaming of growing up, watching the Bulls, and now playing for that team, they take it very seriously and play with a little more vigor and grit when it comes to playing in Chicago. And that's what makes me look forward to seeing Jevon Carter this year the most. Not only what he's going to bring from a veteran leadership standpoint, or the fact that he's going to help with the Bulls shooting and perimeter defense, but the fact that he's going to take a sense of pride in playing for this team. And if I'm being honest, we kind of haven't seen that from a lot of Bulls players in recent years. And then, of course, the media spoke to Coby White, talked about his extension and how he was blessed to still be with the organization, and how he hopes to build on what he's improved upon this past season, and how he hopes to have a consistent role with this group, which is fair. And you kind of have to feel for Coby, because ever since joining the Bulls, his role has kind of been all over the place, from coming off the bench to the starting point guard, to then back off the bench, playing the 2, sometimes the 1, playing off the ball in a catch and shoot type role. So hopefully he can get a little more continuity, no pun intended, on whatever his role is going to be this upcoming year. Anyway, those were some of my key takeaways from Media Day. Training camp starts tomorrow. I'll obviously have recaps on each day of training camp, as well as some guests on the channel to talk about camp, so be on the lookout for that. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.